Morning, Kishan.
Floors.
Today we have two articles about legacy software modernization and AI adoption, and specifically focusing on a bit of the more human aspects of things, the change management from people working at the organizations, the things that grew over time. So McKinsey brought out an article, Rethinking Enterprise Architecture for the Agentic Era. I think they're a bit optimistic on some aspects of this, of the AI adoption. The article talks about how the leadership, IT leadership, is forced to bring down their horizon modernization or upgrades or changes on systems from years down to months. And they also discuss how you could go about either go incrementally integrate AI into existing systems or go fully like all at once, change the whole infrastructure, change all the applications. I was wondering, from a general perspective, we'll stop sharing this screen. From a general perspective, Kishan, what do you think about what McKinsey brings into this article? What do you think about that?
I think it's an optimistic way of thinking that agentic AI is going to support you, especially when doing and transformation is substantial, because it's not just a technical change. Like digital transformation always was. It's mostly an operational human change next to the technical change that's below there. So the human aspect is going to also need to, not like in the old sense of digital transformation, or adjusting people to work with certain systems and optimizing certain systems where there will still be a system to talk to or to interface with. Right now, you need to teach people how to think in a different way as well, to talk to an agentic AI or an AI system instead of an interface which you click through. So it's not only transforming the way the actual backend systems or computer systems work, but it's also changing the way people work. And I think that's a very optimistic thing to do as a blanket statement, to say that, okay, you can change everything at once, because that never worked in the simpler times where we just needed to implement a system, let's say SAP or Salesforce, into an organization. And right now you have to do 3 or 4 levels of change at once.
Indeed,
I think
it sounds like if you look at Salesforce and SAP, they have a product already. They only have to implement that and add maybe modules and make some integrations, and that even takes like months and months to not only implement, and then also the training part, the aspects of the learning part is like, would not. How is this like viable from an? I understand. I think maybe you can also say a bit about that, but from an engineering perspective, it probably is okay to modernize systems within months instead of years in the current times. But then you have all the human aspect of things, getting the old insights and the process, the information, all the knowledge out of the people, getting that into the new systems also takes a lot of time, obviously. But then probably you have people left that you still want to have in your new organization, so to speak. They also need to adapt to the new systems, right? It's like a whole change management, digital transformation and change management challenge, this whole AI adoption.
Yeah, and the whole digital transformation landscape is getting on the AI side, but it still doesn't change the most difficult part, which is like you say, the human and change I mentioned aspect. That doesn't get easier, difficult, and more. It's getting a bigger chunk of the work that needs to do. These trajectories fail often, especially when they're tackled in a one-size-fits-all. But they don't really fail because the system doesn't work. They fail because the input is not good enough for the system, or there is not enough people behind the system that doesn't have any to use it, or it doesn't get tested properly. But those things don't change. Those things get even more important in this aspect. So yeah, I think, yeah.
And but there's also something, I think they introduce a couple of options in like when changing your enterprise infrastructure and your applications. They're not in one of the options. I think we don't even consider that as an option. They talk about not like or modernize multiple legacy applications and infrastructure at once. I cannot imagine that there is like a good time to do everything like comprehensively ground up transformation as is suggested as one of the options. I don't think we would even consider that as an option, because that you will get stuck. It takes lots of times. It's almost impossible. So I would say that the middle path that they mention, that is the only option for large organizations. Or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, these things, the way of the smaller organizations where there's not a lot of people that need to stop their work that they're doing right now and think about how to work in a new system and how to set that up. that only works in smaller companies, right? You cannot expect that to in a bigger company where there is so many different departments that interface into a system in different ways, where you need to get them all together and basically extract all the information from each one of them for their own specific and reasons how they use the systems, the legacy systems that are there, and put that knowledge into something new and get the proper tests in place, tools in place, and then teach them to use these tools as well in one go. I don't see that as feasible in any medium to larger size company. Small, maybe if you have 20 people using a system, you could probably get away with that, but anything bigger will be a hassle.
And talking about that, we recently had a discussion with a client about like an application modernization. One of their core systems needs to be modernized. I think two aspects in that modernization and the approach that are interesting. One is the human aspect of how do you work together, because they need to have external help. So, and the other aspect that I found very interesting is that you need to make a decision, as most of the companies that need to do a modernization, they have customers, they have clients that use the platforms or the applications. You need to keep that, and that's the second thing I would like to discuss based on also this article, is you have an existing product with users. You need to maintain the product as long as you don't have a new product, a modernized product that you can introduce to them. The question that I would like to ask you is, how do you look at when you're modernizing an old product, a legacy application, then you have also different builds. You have different launches. I actually mean, like you launch version 1, 2, 3, and 4 with different features. You expand the modernized application. Also, you're not going back to your seller and rebuild the whole application at once. You probably launch incrementally and add new features to the modernized application. How do you determine the MVP version of the modernized application?
So there, as always, kind of depends on the size and complexity. In bigger applications, you normally see that you have to do it incrementally, piece by piece. So screen by screen or functionality is what gets upgraded. You might have seen it in SaaS tools where they upgrade parts of the system, and if you click on a part that hasn't made it, you fall back onto the legacy system. A good example is probably the accounting tool have upgraded parts of their system to be according to the new design and new functionalities, but there are also parts of their system that still use the old design and the old functionality. And you only notice that once you click deeper into the more complex functionalities. So the bigger the system, the more it's into a phased approach where you tackle the low-hanging fruit first and then go into the more complex parts, because you can phase in that design and functionality. For smaller, so we also have a system that we had out of support from the language. Also, the design system was outdated that they used, and we made the decision to do that once. But that only really works if there can be a clean cutoff day and a clean migration path from the old to the new. That maybe has some downtime for the end user, but they can get onboarded into the new system immediately it's up. And that only works when there is a good insight into the existing system and how to transition that into something new. So there's both paths that we have done, but the latter works in a scopable, smaller sized application.
I suppose most of the organizations choose to have the legacy system still running for like a certain amount of time, and having the modernized system also in parallel, maybe onboarding new customers on the modernized system and phasing out the old customers, either completely out or to the new modernized system. I suppose that in 80% of the cases, you have both systems running. Then talking about specifically who needs to maintain and build who needs to maintain the old system and who is going to build the new system. I think in most cases, companies like Eli5, software development studios that specialize in software modernization, they are invited because they have done this before, right? So they know how to modernize a legacy system. They have senior architects like yourself who can draw a modernized system and also make it future-proof. What is the role? What do you think the role should be of most of the companies that we work with have developers, have product designers, or have front-end developers, I mean to say. What do you think their role should be in the most broad sense of the word? How should they work together with us, or should they stay on the legacy systems as long as possible? Or what do you think?
I think the only way this is going to work for get them into the team and get them into the plan as soon as possible. It never works I've never seen it work that a party creates a new system, hands it over, and be done with it. That never works. You need to team backing your plan or with you on the plan, so they feel that it's also their part of that they're also part of the new system. Because in the end, the externals always come in for a certain time, do the heavy lifting, funding goes back to them. There's no need for the external power anymore. And then the internal team needs to keep maintaining what everyone has built. If it only happens to be that the external team built everything, they get the contract ends and the internal team doesn't know anything about it, it fails. It always fails. So work like this is to get everyone into the plan as soon as possible. What's happening, why it's happening. We also have conversations with the internal team on why they did certain things, a certain the gotchas. As I've heard the things that okay, we do it because we have these governance reasons, or we have these compliance reasons, or because a certain customer needs it that way, which might not be obvious. And the people that know that are the actual people that built the system or maintain the existing system. And you cannot get that knowledge just by looking at it. You need to talk to the people and invite them to also get their knowledge into that new system that you're trying to build.
I think maybe, but I think a very good side effect of working with an agency like Eli5 is that you have that knowledge of processes, approaches, security, governance, all these things, build, measure, learn. All these things are also as an additional learning curve added to the team, to the existing team. Maybe you can tell a bit about what your experience in that is, because you guys really, the development team really introduces also a process, a structure, design systems, all these things are also introduced, right?
Yeah, so we have built in years, but also we have worked with tens to almost 100 different companies years where they had different internal teams setups. So we had worked with bigger teams, smaller teams, one person that knows it all, and it's basically 100 different person on all different aspects of the application, where we got onto a small part that we need to add to their existing enterprise. And the team has experience with a lot of different setups, but also with a lot of different people inside of these companies. So we know how to get these people on board, but also how to work with them. They have different externally, but also our vision might not be their vision, but we try to get our knowledge into the processes, how we develop things and why we develop things a certain way. So for example, why we set up tests, why we set up automations, why we set up the different separated environments, why we lock ourselves out of certain things, why we put everything into the name of the customer. All these different things is because we know that at a certain time, but also that once we are not going to be there, the systems that we set in place also need to continue. We still need that separation of concerns. We all need to have a secure environment if we are not there. So that's why we like to set up everything as we would do it for ourselves. Or we also build our own products, right? We also have 4 or 5 different products out there we sell to. So we try to extract those as well and put them into the systems that we are building together with different companies.
I think that makes, besides software modernization that you have as an output, I think this is really a nice addition, a training, learning addition for the people that work inside the companies to get up to speed into the newer technologies, frameworks, processes, approaches. I think that is a really good side effect of working with an agency, but then we are preaching for our own choir then. Let's go to the next article, because I think that is also a bridge to what we just spoke about when McKinsey just said, replace everything, or at least they have it as an option. This article says, just keep the critical legacy software in place and use agentic AI to analyze the, as they call it, quirks, the brokenness of the legacy system, the delays, let that be analyzed by agentic AI. And then on top of that, on top of the legacy systems, build an infrastructure or build an application that eliminates all these delays, quirks, and brokenness by using, skipping or doing the processes in the background and not showing that to the customer, to the user. So first off, what do you think about this approach and this idea of not really touching the business critical legacy systems? Is that a long-term solution, or is it still the Band-Aid? Is it even possible to keep these systems running for the coming 20 years?
Well, keeping them running is probably not the problem, because we are still working in a banking system that has been running for the past 50 years in the same way. So I don't think systems running later than that is going to be an issue. Of course, you're going to be having issues with security, especially systems that are exposed to the internet or to the outside world. But all that is solvable in a way, of a dual sense, right? You can always buy support for legacy systems So I don't think it's a problem that are not going to be running. It's actually something to as well to be build a layer on top of existing legacy applications that does provide user-centric development, right? It only thought about and less thought about the digital transformation side. So we try to enable the user to do modern or modalities that are not existing in the current system, but are feasible if you build a layer on top of that. The problem is that, of course, you never fix the core issue, but it's also a thing and a operational thing. If there is not budget or there is no transformation inside of a certain company or environment that uses these legacy systems, it's kind of a moot point to change everything because it's never going to happen, or at least not going to happen in a time frame that helps to keep that, to grow as the housings and keep that, to know that it's there and that indeed build something on top of that that removes those quirks. We did that quite often, actually, especially legacy systems that we either were not allowed to touch, or it was the way it was. Architecture didn't want to change that. Or they have why these things happen and are certain ways also contracts. They are in multi-year contracts that they cannot break up. We saw it before in a Microsoft environment where they year contract, and they, that's the way it works. That's the way it happened until they needed to retender that part. And we wanted to build something which makes life easier of the customer. And what we had to do, build a layer on top of the existing legacy system that they were using, and or where they were needed in a quite convoluted way, but they never experienced that. They got a very smooth user experience. So we do these things if they are not possible.
As you say, more often it depends the strategy that you pick.
As always.
What is the downside of that, in a sense of, I suppose you have two systems running at the same time, and one is then, I think you hear a lot about the cost of maintaining legacy systems. I suppose that is also partly because of like the hardware and such, but it's definitely also about people. Would that be hardware licenses, like that type of cost, plus the retiring workforce? As also the article says about the retiring workforce, how do you utilize their knowledge before they're gone and maybe even not even available whatsoever, and then you have a system in place that nobody knows how it works? Are those the two biggest risks, or do you also see other things that can be a problem?
Those are big risks, of course, but because if you have a legacy state, you don't have support, or you need to purchase support. And if you don't, you have a issue or potential security. But as you say, it's also you keep seeing things on top of what you already have, so they inevitably creates more things to maintain. The thing, right? You never downsize, you create more to maintain. So eventually it's not going to be a maintainable solution anymore, because you have maybe 20 different functionalities built on top of something that wasn't really made for it. You might have to think about changing the way that system works, or what that system is, to make sure that the 20 things you built on top of the one thing become one thing. But that is, that happens organically in time, because in the creating value is the most important part. But no, obviously you create more technical debt then. And technical debt is not necessarily a bad thing if you know and have a risk enough, lower debt. If you just keep stacking technical debt, then it's going to be a common issue, yes.
But you can also, maybe it's not a strategy, but we can hope for the fact that maybe in 10 years, the legacy system is used anymore, like the application for it is maybe not necessary anymore. Or we can argue that maybe the artificial intelligence will be so significant that can take over the legacy part or rebuilding part even. So we could argue for that. It's maybe not a good strategy, but what I like about the article is that it challenges the idea that the innovation, the AI orchestration, the AI innovations, that they require replacement. And I like that about the article, that it's not so much, maybe you can even keep your old stuff and still participate in the AI game, so to speak.
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, you just need to build it to be able to do things with it. It's just a choice. Yeah.
Okay, now we're on the same page. Nice. There is something about job shifts in the article, about saying the human work will, and I quote then, shift more towards judgment and empathy. So it says a bit about the back-end engineer who spent the last 10 years legacy databases. That sounds like a very completely different job, to move towards judgment and empathy. What's your perspective on that? Because you worked a lot on with Cloud Code, for example, and many different other LLMs. How does the job actually changes for these engineers? What's your perspective?
The more AI or AI tooling is introduced, the more it becomes judging. Yeah. So we're trying to achieve here at Eli5 is to keep um, on AI use. So we are building our interfaces to be and what we are actually trying to achieve, and 20% is where it needs guidance. Because right now, if you don't set up this, what you're going to do is basically you have to keep feeding it up. You have to keep adjusting its path, and that's where your job completely changes from being a person that actually builds things into that steers somebody to build things the way you want it to build things. And it's the difference. It has a completely different mental load. I talked about it before. You are working with these systems right now. If you don't feed them the correct tooling, the correct skills, is basically having to normally would have then that you would normally would have if you were just the one planning and executing. Since the execution is not done by you anymore, it's completely different. So yes, it is a complete shift as is. So if you also change if idea that it does everything you want it to do as is, you will get into issues. The burnout rate will be enormous because the backend engineer, as you said, not handled to do these management. You're basically a manager then of not a person, but of an AI or an AIT. They don't get into the approach where you can rely on what it's doing or get it enough knowledge of how you want it to do things to get into that 80% state where it's 80%, you don't have to worry about it because it has enough knowledge of how you want it to do the task you want it to do, and it will execute it. And the 20% it needs to ask you, so you do it ahead of time or can steer it ahead of time. It's becoming that's also why there's a lot of resistance, I think, because the people see if they get any using right now without any guidance or without any work put into what the AI actually needs to do for that specific company or specific task or specific products. It's people that know how to work with these things that handle it the best, and the people that don't are just lost.
And I think we should talk a bit about that, because Reddit also, I recognized multiple posts on Reddit exactly what you mentioned about the drain that it has on your mental capacity. So we'll talk about that in the next article review. With regards to the engineer changing, that is interesting, as that engineer wants to be an engineer, but now needs to be a manager. And a manager, not so much a manager of humans, obviously, which requires a bit less empathy. I think if you are a manager of the LLM, you can misuse, or you don't need to be super, not yet, as long as they're not in the physical world, you need to be not nice to it. Maybe it helps, I'm not sure.
Well, they actually prove that the way you actually makes the output, if you just give it tasks, apparently dismissive of the tasks it's doing, or in the instructions you're giving, you're getting a lower level of response because it apparently in a lower space needs to pull data from than if you approach it in
or nice and
it pulls everything from the internet, right? If people are dismissive, so if you are doing coding tasks or asking it things where pull the information, for example, from Wikipedia articles and discussions, etc. The Stack Overflow, for example, if you have that as your training data, the people that give the snarkiest responses are not going to be the best responses, and that's where it's going to look at. And in the other side, it's going to be more descriptive, the more relevant, the more approach it better, because that's also more the way humans communicate with each other.
Oh, that makes sense. And I think I saw an engineer was looking at his prompt history.
Well, it helps, yeah. Not some, but for some, it's very colored in the way you talk, yeah.
A bit back, an engineer is better at doing the prompting to build something as a non-engineer, because they understand what happens in the backend. They understand what is executed. They can judge what is executed. And that makes sense. I think nobody would disagree on that. Then I suppose it's easier to have an engineer as an orchestrator or as the human in the loop and teach him or her management skills, or at least like the steering management skills, than the other way around. Like, this is really an engineering game, I suppose, right?
For engineering tasks, yeah, definitely, because he only needs to be the one that steers. You also need to be the one that approves. And you know what it's writing, you can also cannot approve. It will ask you questions, and if you don't know, if you haven't thought about how to do certain things or you don't know the answer, you can just answer, but it probably what you want it to do.
I think the instructions of in general, the instructions of an engineer to build an application are better than the non-engineer, because they know what the context or the guardrails or they have experience. So that makes the prompt better.
Make it scalable. It's a very broad, and the LLM can interpret it a million different ways. An engineer will probably say, hey, I want to have a sharded database. I want to have a backend that is all these words that mean, and an architect a system in a certain way. Just, okay, I want it to scale to 1 million people. And it doesn't say anything.
So I suppose from like the article standpoint, and I think also for us as an agency, I suppose it would make sense to guide our engineers more also towards that management role in the sense of the agent orchestrator, the LLM orchestrator, right?
Well, so that's what we're trying to do here, to make it less of a managerial judging thing, but more that you are working with a coworker that you are to do, and while you are working on something else. So that's why I'm talking about the 80. You can, for 80%, trust what they are doing, and the 20% is where you get, as if you were getting a DM that they will ask you a question, but right now it's a CLI that asks you a question.
Got it. Okay. That concludes our review or our article discussion. Thanks for your time, Kishan.